That's a deal, right? Ride with me if you ride with me. You can slide with me if you feel like 550 on the 5 sticky. Come get high with me. That's a deal, right? That's a deal, right?
So they want me down and out. Ay, we ain't going out like that. We ain't going out like that. Watch me go and bounce right back. Down for the count, but the hound strike back.
Hello, everybody, and happy early Valentine's Day. This episode is for the lovers. That was my quiet storm voice. Uh, you got to be a certain age to understand that reference. So, today, I want to jump in with something that'll be relevant to make your Valentine's Day a success, I think, depending on how quickly you can apply. But it may take some more time. So we're going to touch on uh, some things related to sex and intimacy um, that will have implications for Valentine's Day for many people, but also just year round. Because, it's not always about just that one day. It's about what's the norm, what's the tenor of the relationship. So we'll start there. And then that's a great segue, or maybe not a great segue, into some breaking news. So TMZ is reporting that Kanye and his wife are headed for divorce and splitting and so on and so forth. So we'll deal with some of that, as well as I'm not sure how you would like to describe it, but this breakdown, this episode that Kanye had, and how all those things tie together in terms of his diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And then I also want to go back to Kendrick's Super Bowl halftime show performance and the ongoing stuff with Drake, and particularly how it points to something going on within our culture in terms of intelligence and intellect and what we promote in terms of our image and perception in the public sphere. So that's going to be where we land. Uh, so to begin, you probably feel this as a man listening. I don't think the pressure is on women as much, but there's this pressure around Valentine's Day, birthdays, and holidays, maybe in general, if you're a man and in a relationship. And there are a variety of reasons why that pressure is there, but the expectation is to perform, to do something elaborate, to do something, I almost say it's seductive, but not necessarily just seductive, but to do something romantic, loving, caring, emotional, deep, things of that nature. Uh, and a lot of men rack their brains trying to figure out, how do I perform to the way that she likes for this occasion. That happens a lot. And there's a lot of angst around it. And I don't even know if that necessarily should be there. And again, as I mentioned, there are a variety of reasons why that's the case, but I do want to get at some specific examples of how we play a part in that and how we can make a difference in terms of our relationships. So this will be like some free relationship counseling for you, for the men and women listening, but more particularly for the men in terms of there tends to be this difficulty in understanding the opposite sex. I've never had that issue. That may be due to my family dynamics and who was around, but I also think it's due to effort. You know, uh, I wouldn't even attribute it to studying counseling or even necessarily doing couples and relationship counseling. But for me, it's more so just taking an interest in the other. I want to understand everybody, so I make an effort to understand people other than people that look or think like me. Um, and with the goal of a successful and healthy relationship, it's important to understand women, but also to understand your partner specifically. So, with that, I do think men have a lot of pressure on them around Valentine's Day, in many cases, due to their lack of emotional intimacy with their partner year round. You're missing the mark year round. So she is expecting you to make up for how much you're missing the mark emotionally on Valentine's Day. So if you can knock it out the park on Valentine's Day, that'll put you in the clear for maybe the next few weeks or so. So it's almost like what's happening is she's having an emotional drought, and there's this buildup of desire for emotional intimacy. And it's almost like if I don't get it a year round, I at least need to get something on Valentine's Day or on my birthday. And it doesn't have to be like that. And in many cases, it goes back to men's understanding of emotional intimacy. So, first, I want to read something to you. Now, this is from a book called The Sex Myth: The Gap Between Our Fantasies and Reality by Rachel Hills. I did a video on this before, and it's on the at Whole Brother Mission uh, Instagram and uh, TikTok, a little further back. But sex is not intimacy. It's chapter 1 of the book, The Sex Myth. Sex is not intimacy. It can be a part of intimacy, no question, but sex doesn't equal intimacy. It doesn't come with a guarantee of intimacy. Sex isn't absolutely necessary for intimacy, and yet almost every reference to intimacy in modern popular culture is a reference to sex. If we are ever to truly experience intimacy, we must first move beyond the pubescent notion that sex and intimacy are synonymous. Intimacy is the one thing that a person cannot live happily without. Think about it. Who are the happiest people you know? The people who are truly thriving. Do they have just sex? Do they just have sex, or do they have intimacy? They have intimacy, don't they? They might have sex too, but the foundation of their lives is an authentic experience of intimacy. They have people they can share their lives with. They have a genuine interest in the people around them. They have great relationships. We can live happily without new cars and designer clothes, yada, yada, yada. But that's all I wanted to read. So this is really important for men to understand because we often assume that sex is intimacy. So if I tell you you're not intimate with your partner, so there's all this pressure around Valentine's Day to make up for the lack of intimacy, you as a man may respond, "What do you mean I don't have intimacy? We have sex all the time." But sex is not necessarily intimacy. As the book noted, you can have sex without intimacy. Think about one night stands. Think about men who pay for prostitutes. Sex is an intimate act, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's intimacy, emotional intimacy, relational intimacy between the two parties having the sex. And unfortunately, there are many cases where people are in romantic relationships and there's no intimacy. I've lost count of how many times I've heard in session or even in movies where women talk about they feel like a stranger in their own home, or they feel like there's a wall up with their partner. And this is in part due to a lack of emotional depth in our relationships. And that's because we as men oftentimes have not explored emotional intelligence or emotional regulation in our own lives. So it's really hard to connect emotionally, especially if you've been through bad breakups or issues with women before. It's hard to really get, quote, emotionally deep with your partner if you haven't even gone there with yourself. So many of us have to do the work of actually becoming emotionally aware and emotionally intimate ourselves so that we can then do that for our partner. So, first, I'm going to offer you two ways to kind of remedy this. First is rather than looking at just sex, rather than looking at the frequency of communication, because I know some guys, again, get frustrated. It's like, well, what the hell else I got to do, right? But rather than just looking at the sex that you have and the frequency of communication, well, I talk to her every day. Rather than just looking at those things, look at the depth of communication, not frequency of communication. Look at depth of communication. Are you inquiring about how she thinks, how she feels, her experiences, understanding the uniqueness of her personality? Just because we're talking doesn't mean we're having an intimate conversation. Uh, Sharing about, oh, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. The communication pyramid will be super helpful here. So think about this. At the top of the communication pyramid, and this is in my first book, Whole Brother, Debunking the Myths That Break the Black Family, I was talking about it in the context of how men in their friendships tend to lack depth. But it can also apply in our romantic relationships too, because the issue is us just not going to that place. So think of a pyramid or a triangle. At the top, you have cliches. This type of communication is cliches. It's just those go-to phrases that we say that don't really have anything behind them. I always say for those that go to church, it's the people that say, "How you doing?" and you respond, "Well, I'm blessed and highly favored." For a lot of men, "What's up with you?" "I'm good." And we'll say I'm good even if I'm not good. I'm just saying this go-to phrase. It's a cliche, and I'm not even really thinking about what I'm communicating to you. I'm just responding with something that is expected or familiar. So you got cliches, then you got facts. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl. Those are the facts. The Eagles won, the Chiefs lost. Uh, then, under the facts, you have opinions. Uh, I don't think they cheated, but you might think, or the Eagles cheated to win the Super Bowl. Something like that. They didn't. Uh, so opinions about the facts, right? And then under opinions, you have feelings, sharing how you feel. And then under the feelings is full transparency, sharing all of who you are. A lot of times, men in our friendships, we stay up here with the cliches and the facts. And sometimes we carry that over into our romantic relationships. We're not really sharing all of who we are. So, as I mentioned, you're going to want to inquire about her interests, the way she thinks, rather than being like some of the red pill content creators who just make observations about women and talk trash about them, who denote the differences between them and us and just trash them and complain and are bitter. Take interest in those differences. Maybe even push back on certain behaviors in a loving way. Suggest a better way to handle things or a better way to think through things. This is the reality of relationship. In relationships that are close, we notice differences and we engage with them rather than penalizing someone for thinking or moving differently than we do. That's the idea of relationship, especially in a romantic context. So we want to look at taking interest in the other person. That helps you to get deeper to emotions and transparency, sharing all of who you are. You got to know who they are. And sometimes in couples counseling, I've pushed back on some men or tried to challenge them like, hey, you should know your partner better than I. So when they have a beef or a miscommunication about something, it's like, why do I know that that's going to rub her this way, but you don't know that? You should know that too. That's your partner. You should take more of an interest in understanding her. And that applies both ways, it's vice versa. But I'm talking to the men right now. So breaking down or working your way down to that lower level of communication, sharing how you genuinely feel without judgment, of course, and also sharing all of who you are. And in terms of sharing all of who you are, that don't include sharing things that you're not necessarily the proudest of, sharing your insecurities. So often in our relationships, even deep into the relationship, we still want to be seen a certain way. So I only show you my strength. I don't show you my weaknesses. That's not true intimacy. That's just presenting a false picture of who you are or just showing the positives. But the reality is there's some negatives there. There's some insecurities there. There's some weaknesses there. With your romantic partner, it should be a case where you're sharing all of that. That's what makes the closeness. And you don't have to only do this in romantic scenarios. And I think if we went to that lower level of communication in our friendships, we'd be better equipped to have closeness in our romantic relationships. So, like I mentioned, one aspect is taking an interest in her, uh, looking beyond the consistency of communication and looking at the depth of communication, going down to that lowest level, level one, uh, with her, and it being vice versa. The other thing is how you react or respond to her emotions. I've again lost count of how many times couples have issues, or the man in particular has an issue because sex has stopped in the relationship. She's not having sex with me. And oftentimes it's due to, oftentimes a a stoppage of sex in the relationship is due to a man not making her feel emotionally safe. Now, again, there are a variety of reasons why there may be no sex in a relationship, but here's a common one. Men say or do things that are emotionally harmful and then expect her to get over it and still be willing to have sex, because we might function that way. We might find it easy to overlook the fact that I'm mad at you or offended with something you said or did. We tend to find it easy to push that aside and still engage sexually because the desire for sex is greater than the offense. Whereas for women, it might be different more often than not. This is not a one size fits all. I'm just pointing out a trend to you. So women may not be willing or comfortable having sex if there is an open-ended issue, an offense, or an unresolved argument. So we have to look at, are we putting her in a bad emotional place due to how we react? So again, you'll see on Twitter, aka I call it hell, there's a lot of guys who will just make observations about women and just trash them. And I always thought, in terms of the red pill content and the Kevin Samuels content, you can have these observations, but what's the end goal? If we're all men just locking arms together talking about, yeah, they do this and yeah, they do that, they need to change on this, what's the end goal though? Is it just for us to piss the women off, to expose them? Or are you going to learn about these trends that you may notice amongst women and strategically date women that don't have those flaws? Or date women that actually are willing to grow in those areas? Like, it has to have an end goal if seemingly you want to be in a relationship. It's not just to be the finger pointer or the perpetual critic of women that's single. So we have to do better with processing through someone else's emotions. And again, the difficulty with that is when she's bringing all these emotions to me, it's very hard for me to respond appropriately because I don't even go there with my own self. I don't acknowledge the insecurities that I have, the insecure feelings that I have, the doubts that I have about myself, the memories of things that happened that I want to just black out. I don't go there. I just kind of try to skip over it, skip past it. And I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of men. So when we do that, it makes it hard for us to respond to our partner appropriately. And that can create emotional distance, which can lead to a lack of sex. But particularly, that lack of sex will be tied to a lack of felt intimacy. So these are the things that we need to look into as men to establish true intimacy and to have uh, some relieved pressure as it relates to Valentine's Day. Because as I mentioned, a lack in these areas are what makes some women feel like I need him to make up for it here. That's the cycle that a lot of people end up being in. Grand gestures make up for the perpetual lack of intimacy. But if there is a continued perpetual intimacy throughout the relationship, then there's not as much pressure on Valentine's Day to be that elaborate. I'm not saying spend less money than you did last year because you've been nicer to her. Don't get me in trouble for saying that. I didn't say that. But what I am saying is you can be as elaborate as you want in terms of gifts and dates and so on Valentine's Day. But what ends up mattering the most is that emotional intimacy. And to be honest with you, if you grow in this emotional intimacy area, it actually might save you some money, honestly. Growing in emotional intimacy and connection and helping her feel seen, heard, understood, and safe might save you from having to make up for all that with elaborate gifts and so on and so forth. I'm not saying stop doing those things, but again, a lot of guys have to do that to make up for lacking in other areas. So look at yourself. Consider working through some of this personally in therapy so that you can be emotionally available to your partner. You can work with me if you like. atwbm.com. Uh, so that's where I wanted to start in terms of I want to help you to have a good Valentine's Day. So listen to this with her, open up that conversation, maybe I'm gonna try to get this episode out before Valentine's Day gets here to give you more opportunity. Maybe I can listen to it the night before, but just wanted to get that out there. So that's my spiel on sex versus intimacy and Valentine's Day. Be sure to check out that book, Rachel Hill's The Sex Myth. And also, if you want to know more about the communication pyramid or other ways that we can grow as men to be better brothers, friends, husbands, dads, partners, check out Whole Brother Debunking the Myths that Break the Black Family. It's on wholebrothermission.com or atwbm.com. Uh, so that's that. Moving on. Um, there was a article from TMZ. TMZ, their headline is Kanye West and Bianca Censori Splitsville. They're saying that they're separated and headed for divorce. And before this even came out, Kanye was in the news this week uh, because of, I can't even begin to try to share some of that stuff with you because it was so bad. Um, he started posting a lot of wild stuff on Twitter. Some of it was anti-Semitic. Some of it was just videos of pornography. Some of it was him being racist. Uh, it was just a lot of wild stuff that seemed so unnecessary and out of the blue. He also kept defending Diddy as well. So he just went on this rant. It offended a lot of people, got a lot of people talking. And I think I saw something that said that during this rant, his talent agency dropped him. And, what I've always felt the need to address is Kanye's diagnosis. One of the most viewed episodes on this first round when I launched this podcast as the Whole Brother Mission podcast, I did an episode on bipolar disorder and Kanye West. You can look back for that. Just scroll on back. But that was one of the most viewed ones, and I think people were fascinated with the complexities of bipolar disorder. And I always think that that gets lost in this conversation, and particularly, it's kind of awkward to say this, but the people that keep calling some of his erratic behaviors his genius, it makes me wonder about where their mental state is too, that they're so intrigued and fascinated, and they call it genius. Uh, but more recently, I actually read an article where Kanye was supposedly talking to Bianca, and she said that she doesn't think he has bipolar disorder. So he got assessed again, and he got diagnosed with autism. So he says that he doesn't have bipolar disorder anymore. He has autism. That was a misdiagnosis, apparently. But I would say, definitely from observations, it looks like bipolar disorder. Um, it's really important to understand this to help the people in need, but also to process through uh, some of the behaviors here. Rather than applauding it and encouraging it, I think we need to look at it with a lot more compassion and grace. This doesn't mean that Kanye cannot be held accountable for any of his behaviors, but I do think it's important for us to educate ourselves. So I can talk about autism later because I think what's going on with Kanye is definitely the diagnosis that he's was diagnosed with before, which is the bipolar disorder. So I grew up in a family that wasn't very mental health inclined, but my grandmother, rest in peace, there were certain people she dealt with who she felt like were moody, who were cool sometimes and weren't. So she would always throw bipolar out there for people that were rude sometimes and nice other times. So when she had opposing experiences, she would call people, she actually would say polar bi. She said it backwards, but she's talking about bipolar. But to go deeper and get a more clear understanding for us as Black people about bipolar disorder, it's a mood disorder characterized by two different mood extremes. One is the lower mood that's considered depression, and one is the higher mood, which is considered mania. You probably have already heard about depression. Think about it as a level of hopelessness. It could include sadness. People can be high functioning and still feeling these intense, loathsome feelings on the inside. Sometimes it can look like a decreased appetite, just want to sleep all day, don't want to socialize, self isolation, loss of interest in things that someone was once interested in. It's just kind of shutting down, disconnecting for some. But for others, they're still shutting down and disconnecting, but they're also able to still be functional and you wouldn't even know or mask their symptoms and to keep you thinking that everything's cool. Because there's also this element of not wanting to be a burden to others. So they'll hide what they're really going through internally. But be seen as a low mood. Mania, when I say high mood, uh, I mean that, and I am saying this intentionally, I mean that in a negative way, though. It's not just super happy per se, because it's definitely can be destructive. It's more so a euphoric feeling invincible. Mania is often accompanied with delusions of grandeur, thinking higher of yourself than you should. Sometimes there's a God complex there. Remember, we're talking about Kanye. Sometimes there's a God complex there. Hypersexuality, that's not just being horny, but it's like a ramped up version of your normal sex drive to the point of danger or recklessness, putting yourself in risky sexual positions or situations. Uh, Sometimes there's pressured speech, speaking very fast or intently. Somebody might ask you a question and then start talking before you can even answer it, and then ask you another question. They just keep going. Driving fast, not noticing it, impulsive spending. Uh, and a lot of times during manic episodes, people cause a lot of damage that they don't remember after the fact. So they have to pick up the pieces of the relationships that they damaged. Um, the stat that I remember most recently was that it's believed that 90% of marriages with a bipolar spouse end in divorce. Just because it's very hard to deal with, especially if you're not familiar with the diagnosis. The people that are closest, I've seen time and time again, the people that are closest to the person with the diagnosis end up suffering a lot too. It can be hell for them because of the person's outbursts. And again, delusions and hallucinations can happen where they're hearing things that didn't actually happen, seeing things that didn't actually happen, or remembering things in a way that it didn't actually go down, or just creating scenarios. So it's all around a very difficult thing, and the person can be a danger emotionally or physically to themselves and emotionally to the other person if they're dating. So, you know, I am not working with Kanye, obviously, but now since the diagnosis was made public, I've felt more comfortable to speak more on it. And there are so often things that I see that kind of prove the diagnosis to me. When Kanye was divorcing Kim, he decided to run for president at the last minute, didn't do all the proper filings, and was doing these campaign stops and crying about abortion and then suddenly wanting to become like a Christian leader too, while also emphasizing that Kim was too overtly sexual. And then fast forward, his wife's always naked. Um, I would look back at that phase of running for president, divorcing Kim, and just doing a little bit of everything. You can respect his musical ability without trying to make him an intellectual genius, for one. But two, um, Kanye keeps hurting himself, his business, his money, his reputation. He just keeps screwing his own self. And it's not some unique genius where there's a master plan on why he said those anti Semitic things or why Bianca's naked all the time or he's posting porn, you know? So there's a lot going on there that we need to, for those that pray, should be in prayer about because someone mentioned it online. I forgot who. Someone said something. Uh, was it Joe Rogan? Somebody said something about worrying about Kanye killing himself. It was either Ben Shapiro or Joe Rogan, and then Kanye ended up addressing it. But I'll say that I felt that too. I'm worried as someone that knows what bipolar disorder looks like and has seen how this has progressed for other people, I am worried that he'll eventually do something fatal. Um, you might see the confidence and the boastfulness and the pride, but oftentimes what's going on the inside is not that secure. And someone can be sticking their chest out, boastful, and still miserable on the inside, is what I'm saying. So don't think that because he's speaking boldly and pridefully that he must be doing well. Quite the opposite, most likely. Uh, and now that he believes he doesn't have it and it's just autism, I imagine he's not taking any medication anymore. And, there are a lot of concerns there. I don't want anything to happen to him. I would never wish death on anybody. But watching the patterns as someone that's informed, it does seem like it could go that direction. And I hope not. Um, and I've always thought the difficulty with this is that he is so rich and independent that so many people around him are yes men. Don't want to cross him because he lashes out the way he does. May strike fear in people. So it's really hard to get him the help he needs, especially if he doesn't think he needs it, and he has all these resources to just do what he wants. Uh, Most cases I've dealt with bipolar disorder, people found out they had it because of something that they did during a manic episode. They either did something criminal, ended up in jail, or they did something that ultimately physically harmed their own self and they ended up in a hospital or a psych ward. Um, and, you know, these are things that I wish people cared about more because I also recently spoke about how Kanye was doing his posting. Then this video of Kodak Black looking like he was on something, sitting on the ground eating chicken came out. And then Kanye said he wanted to get in contact with Kodak. And Kodak has always, as we've known, had a drug issue. And I'm bringing this up to say that I wish we had more of a care for the humanity of the artist rather than just focusing on trying to get more music from them. It is so visibly clear that a lot of these artists, particularly rappers, black men, that are not doing well internally and personally. Yeah, as fans, we just want more music. But it's like, I wish the industry and us as fans would hold off on certain things. And I always give props where it's due. I know people criticize him because they feel like he's anti Kanye, but I remember Charlemagne the God had a event where he was going to be interviewing Kanye West, and because he saw kind of Kanye on the decline, he canceled the event and said, I can't have Kanye on stage. I don't want to interview him and talk to him in this state because he's probably just going to say and do destructive things that hurt other people and hurt himself. So I can't do that. We need more people like that. We need more fans like that aren't going to just keep applauding and pushing and pushing and pushing. So, um, if you have any additional questions about bipolar disorder, there's a lot of content obviously online, but you can send in via at Whole Brother Mission Instagram or TikTok at Whole Brother Mission, and I can see if I can get to some of that. But it does, I would say, how it looks in black men. It'd be nice to have more research on that, uh, and also we need to deal with how it may be misunderstood as a confident or cocky person. Um, because men are encouraged to fake it till you make it. Don't let them see you sweat. Stick your chest out. Be confident. Even be cocky. Be bold. Boast in confidence or boast in areas that you actually feel weak in. Because we're presenting that counter narrative, I do think sometimes people that are like Kanye that may have this diagnosis or have his personality type, we might just applaud them and think that's confidence, but it's really not. Um, Sometimes it's delusion, deep seated delusion, and if we were, if we had the education to see these things, then we can understand and support better rather than just applauding it. Like, look at that confidence. And some people wish they were as confident as Kanye, but that's actually may not be the end of the story. So That's all I have for uh, Kanye and bipolar disorder. Um, if he is indeed divorcing, I was never sure that they were married because I thought there was a point in time where he was calling her his wife and they weren't actually married. But I'm seeing some things that say that they were. But I do wanna say that it's going to be important that uh, he humble himself. The confidence and the cockiness that we know Kanye for, I would say, is one of the things that hurts him the most. I always think Kanye told Sway, "You ain't got the answer, Sway." It seems like Kanye has to recognize that he doesn't have the answers to truly get the help that he needs and stabilize. Last thing I'll say on this is there are other artists who have the same diagnosis who aren't having these same type of situations as Kanye, and I don't know the details of why he has these frequent outbursts, but I'll have you know that Chris Brown has bipolar disorder as well, and so does Ron Artest, and so does Mariah Carey, and actually Kim Kardashian was with Pete Davidson right after leaving Kanye, and Pete Davidson has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, as far as I know. So I can't tell you what those people are taking or are not taking, but I can say that the diagnosis doesn't have to always look like these ups and downs that Kanye goes through. There are people who have it who you wouldn't even know. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Um, Okay, I'm looking at the time. I may be able to get through this Kendrick stuff and then have room for some questions. It might work out that way. So I just had one point I wanted to raise about the Kendrick Drake stuff. So Kendrick performed at the Super Bowl. You got Kai Cenat saying it was actually silent during his performance. People saying Kendrick sucks. He's not a good artist. You ain't never been out somewhere and somebody said turn on that Kendrick Lamar. Fine, fine. I'm not the biggest Kendrick Lamar or Drake fan, but something I brought up earlier this week is Kendrick's halftime show performance had a lot of messaging in it, right? And it was timely for the political moment that we're in. And I know that people aren't necessarily invested in politics, but they're more invested in music. But the ignorance as it relates to politics is now emboldening some ignorance as it relates to the messaging and just ignorance in general. I said in a previous video this week that I do think some people, some of Drake's fans, or people that are critical of the halftime show, some of them are saying it sucked just because it went over their heads. They lack the political context for what he was getting at. One of the things he was getting at is not performing or trying to keep white people comfortable. And then many of us, I'm sure, are familiar with places where you have to mask or perform a certain way, check your blackness at the door to keep white people comfortable. And we live in a cultural moment where we have racism in the highest office in the land. They're rolling back DEI stuff, releasing white people that committed crimes on behalf of Donald Trump, like reinstating the names of army bases that were named after Confederate generals. That's what Pete Hegseth just did with bringing back Fort Bragg. Uh, so it's very much so a racial moment where I would say there are nods from the president and his administration. There's nods to racists that don't like black people, that want to keep this country white. And there's a lot going on in this moment. And Kendrick, from his lane, is doing what he can. And I think that's something we should appreciate and applaud, whether you're a Drake fan or not. But because people are so caught up in defending Drake, trying to side with him, they're trashing somebody that's actually doing something that's beneficial. As an artist, all of us have our different lanes. I don't expect him to try to push legislation. He could use his platform for that, but he's an artist, so he's using his lane to try to help the cause. So I do think it's important for us to not get so caught up in this rap beef and trying to defend Aubrey that you're trashing something that's actually a good thing, or you're not actually giving it your ear and eyes to truly understand it. Uh, and then lastly, in terms of that Super Bowl halftime show, I would say that I think they were saying that he is the first rap solo artist to do the halftime show. Yes, Snoop has done it before, but there was like a mix of people, rappers, and so on and so forth. Dre was there, and others were there. So, whether or not people were silent or not, please know when I looked at because I'm from DC, so I was hoping that the not Redskins Commanders would make it to the Super Bowl. So I looked at tickets, and the cheapest ticket was nosebleed seats for $6,000. So think about the people that had the money to be there to fill those seats. I'm sure it was majority white. Kendrick is a very black artist. I think he's mainstream, but he's still black culture leaning. I do think sometimes we have to recognize that just because somebody is huge in black culture, sometimes they're not huge in mainstream culture to include white people. I think he's definitely crossed over, but it's a different vibe. So if in any case, if there was silence or some quietness, think about white people don't typically respond to rap the same way black people do. A lot of them might not have known him because it was a majority white audience. Uh, And he was making a very political message. Y'all saw what happened to Kaepernick and his political message. Know that the NFL leans kind of conservative, Trumpish, don't talk about race, we don't see color. That's kind of the ilk of the NFL. So there's a lot of factors as to why they maybe didn't respond that I just mentioned. So again, rather than trying to use this as a moment to talk about how much better Drake was than Kendrick, I think if Drake was performing there too, then white people still might have they might be stiff, quiet white people. And it's not even about Kendrick sucking. So I just wanted us to not miss that moment of solidarity that we could have by pushing a beef or so on and so forth. Um, and recognize that some of us really do need to educate ourselves on what's going on in the world, especially before speaking on someone who raps about cultural stuff. If you're ignorant about the cultural stuff, then yeah, you probably didn't get the significance of that. Additionally, I've noticed that fans of Drake's music tend to like the lack of substance. So they don't want the deep messages. They just want something to make somebody twerk, to make you think about your ex, to party, a club hit. Um, and the critique for Drake has been that he hasn't matured. And it's been so interesting to watch people that like Drake to defend the right to not mature. Like he doesn't have to mature. It's okay for him to just still talk like a early 20 something year old, even though he's older and a dad. People have the right to make whatever music they want, but I don't think it's a good cultural place to be in where people are defending the right to not have to grow up or to not mature. And I do think Drake's lack of maturity in his music may be due to a lack of maturity in his own life. And that is a much bigger conversation to have about black men being stuck in an adolescent state. Just wanting to have fun, sleep around. I just want to enjoy myself. Um, I look at a lot of the NBA players. They sign their contract and they start paying for sex with porn stars or getting the most random people pregnant that have no intention to have a family. And you bring in children into a broken world. The DUIs, the drugs, the alcohol, the parties, the compromising positions they're put in, oftentimes due to sex. Many of us have made degeneracy and immaturity and dysfunction our norm, and we just call it culture. You know, it's funny, somebody's going viral right now for tweeting that uh, Jalen Hurts is too mature for his age. He's still 20 something. He should go have some fun. Um, and that is reflective of a culture that doesn't appreciate or understand the importance of maturing. I see we often make excuses when black men in the media do something ignorant at 22 or 23. We still try to say that they're just a boy, even though they're somebody's father. We don't want to delay immaturity. We want to get to it quicker because the reality is you're only a child until you're what, 17, 18? Then you're considered an adult. So from 18 forward, you're an adult. You spend the rest of your life as an adult. So holding on to this childhood recklessness is not going to serve you. Mature quicker. to mature, uh, the faster you mature, the better, because you're going to be adult for the rest of your life. So prepare for the thing that you're going to be doing long term, which is being an adult and being expected to function in a responsible way. So adolescence, immaturity, juvenile behaviors, recklessness is not something to encourage or applaud, but that is what a lot of rap music applauds. And I've always often asked the question, like, do we get these ignorant themes because that's what we support? So the labels are putting out more of that because that's what we're supporting, or are they pushing that to us regardless and we're responding to the programming? I wonder, is it the chicken before the egg? Like, what's coming first? But either way, it needs to stop. There's a cultural moment where we need to support more positive images, and you can't just get so caught up in supporting your light skinned brother, or or the fact that you really like Drake's music, so you want to trash somebody's catalog and the work that they've done. So the beef is the beef, but that aside, though, there's bigger fish to fry, I would say. So I'm saying, let's just think bigger for a moment as Black people. That's something to consider. Um, so yeah, though that was my thoughts on that. Uh, as mentioned before, I am looking to bring in guests to contribute to the show as well. So if you have people in mind, if you'd like to contribute to a particular conversation, try one of the social media profiles, particularly Instagram at Whole Brother Mission. You can join in the discussion there. Also, you can send in questions there. So if you want to be on the show, if you want to refer somebody, or if you have a question you like answered on the show, you can send it all there. Uh, Check out Rachel Hill's The Sex Myth. Check out Whole Brother Debunking the Myths That Break the Black Family. And again, if you or someone you know needs a therapist, or if you want to work through some couples counseling so that your next Valentine's Day can be a lot more stable and better, go to wholebrothermission.com and you can jump right in and be connected with a culturally competent Black therapist. Um, and Whole Brother Mission primarily focuses on serving Black men and their families, but we have a network of therapists. There are 3,000 plus nationwide, and we can serve anybody. So even if you're listening and you're not Black, you can be referred and connected to. We can help anybody. Just felt the need to clarify that. All right, y'all. Thank you for joining me. Enjoy your Valentine's Day. Uh, and remember, sex is not intimacy.